Eugenia Cooney has been a public figure on the internet for a very long time, and in that time she's been constantly under fire for doing a number of very controversial things online. These things include being a woman, having eating disorder related problems in her private life, and setting boundaries with her audience. That's right, I'm coming out of the gates unrestrained and I'm coming for blood. I'm back on the grind that is having unpopular but correct opinions online. The way that eating disorders are talked about online is something which makes me personally feel a little bit icky. Not in a I'm a sensitive snowflake kind of way, but more in a this feels very wrong and goes squarely against more than one of my reasoned moral principles. Especially when the person who has the eating disorder is a content creator, whose body, fashion choices, and entire personality has been put on display on the internet for millions to see as a result of the nature of their career. EDs are a very sensitive subject area, and there's a lot of nuance, boundaries, and trauma attached to the conversations surrounding them that need to be set in stone. The fact that you can still see comments like this one in 2021 is concerning, to say the least. So before we go about talking about Eugenia Cooney, and in order to not sound like that guy, there are a lot of things that we need to take into account before we form our opinions on this situation. Let's get things straight. Our society doesn't make things easy for women, much less women who aren't model thin and white. A lot of this is generalization purely for the sake of simplifying how we talk about these issues a little bit. There are bound to be women who don't experience this as much or even at all, but generally people who are raised female are usually taught radically different things from those who are raised male. And our society teaches us these things in ways that aren't necessarily directly telling us either. For example, do you remember being told that murder is wrong? Or even coming to the reasoned conclusion within your own moral framework that murder isn't a good thing to do? Probably not. But we've seen shows on TV and characters in books where the person who murdered someone is the bad guy, with scary music playing in the background. And we learned without really needing to be told that murder isn't particularly neat. And we kind of just adjusted our view on murder in our formative years through osmosis, without really noticing that's what we did. In a similar way, we picked up a whole bunch of subtle gestures, ideas, and beliefs relating to how we see men versus how we see women. The vast majority of women we see in media, whether it's on the big screen, small screen, or home screen, are usually white, skinny, conventionally attractive, straight, submissive and breedable, to use a contemporary term which is going to be out of date by the time this video comes out. Whereas the majority of men are seen as buff and heroic, a confident, bold man who is always a noble and chivalrous gentleman and is rarely emotional. And this is portrayed in numerous different ways. The internet's own Celeste Does Stuff has an interesting project showcasing this fact, in which she looks at various top 3 movies according to critics, IMDb, top 3 grossing movies, and compares just the amount of dialogue from men versus the dialogue from women. And the results are illuminating, where women had substantially less dialogue than men, going as low as 10% in some categories. Not necessarily deliberately, not maliciously, just in the sense that creators of these movies grew up, learned everything they know in a world where everyone was a little bit sexist. So some of that rubbed off on them, and got passed down from generation to generation. But this leads to most of us as a society just accepting that that's how things are. Maybe not on a logical, reasoned level, but on an emotive level. There's a lot of things within our society that we just accept and treat as normal. And conversely, a lot of other things that we dismiss and treat as abnormal, that we just don't notice that we're doing. The kicker is, though, for people who don't fit within that normal category, who walk down the street only to see hundreds of people treat them differently to how they'd treat someone who's normal. That's gonna get to you eventually, whether after a few weeks or a few years. It adds up, and that can manifest in some very funny ways. And when I say funny, I mean as in weird, but also as in I'm laughing through the pain. All this isn't to say that a nebulous someone is sat at the top of society, deciding that women are bad and putting that in media, and brainwashing our children into being sexist or anything. That type of thinking is dangerous and can lead to a whole bunch of wild and wacky and dangerous conspiracy theories. Instead, my point, again, is that our world is a wide society of people who are taught everything they know by parents who believed women belonged in the kitchen. And while this new generation might be different from their parents, it still holds true that no matter how much internal cleaning you do yourself inside your brain, you're still using a dirty brush, so some residue of those outdated ideas inevitably remains. I thought I'd clarify all that before I started using terms like patriarchy and implicit sexism, but that's just what they're referring to, just so that we're all on the same page. I know that words like sexism, racism, homophobia, all these buzzwords have this weird little boogeyman created around them, that if you are these things then you're a terrible person who can never be redeemed. But no, everyone's got a little bit of that sort of thing inside them, and fearing it just makes it harder for you to acknowledge them when, and I do say when, you do slip up. No one's perfect after all. Just think of sexism less as a thing you are, more a thing that you do. And some things you do without knowing or thinking about them. Doesn't make it right, obviously, but it makes it a bit more manageable in your brain. Anyway, tangent over, let's bring all this together. If you're a woman, particularly one trying to have some form of online presence which is focused and oriented around you, whether it's your own personal Instagram with 100 followers or a YouTube channel with 1 million subs, then you're most likely going to have a tougher time dealing with more online hatred because all this sexism eventually adds up. You'll usually be expected to conform to these specific standards, otherwise you're going to face a higher amount of harassment, bullying and hate than your notably male counterparts just aren't going to get. And some of those standards are going to be about your weight. The brain does its job internalizing all of that, and boom, eating disorders are 7 times more likely in women than they are in men. I talk in this video here, go check it out, about how to analyze society, we can usually split it into 2 social groups. One seen as normal and the other as abnormal, which are both at odds with one another. But one thing I didn't quite emphasize enough is that you can do this more than once. There's quite a lot of different ways to split these normal-abnormal groups. You can measure male versus female, white versus black, cis versus trans, etc. And while society isn't nice to people with eating disorders, or people with an otherwise unconventionally attractive body, that difference gets amplified when you're a woman as well. Does anyone else remember when Mariah Carey was on the Ellen show, and Ellen tried to coerce Mariah into drinking champagne on the show to prove that she wasn't pregnant, and then 2 weeks later she had to announce that she'd had a miscarriage? Surely we can all agree that that was a bit messed up of Ellen to do, and a violation of Mariah's privacy, and that unnecessarily putting her on blast in front of the public for something that she was very clearly not emotionally ready to talk about publicly in any capacity is at the very least a little bit not okay. So why do thousands of people expect the same thing from Eugenia Cooney? A lot of people think that genuine concern in the wake of potentially serious harm coming to someone they care about is a valid exception to breaking that privacy. And that's definitely something that sounds reasonable in theory. After all, if someone's doing something that's killing themselves without being in the right mind to make a decision to stop, kind of like someone addicted to smoking, isn't it in everyone's best interest to try and get them to stop as soon as possible? YouTube's own Philosophy Tube talks about this in her video, Suicide and Mental Health. An example she uses is that Jehovah's Witnesses think that it's immoral to get blood transfusions. Doesn't come up very often, but the general consensus is that you shouldn't have to get a medical treatment if you don't want one. And that's accepted usually as fine, cool, whatever. But what if it's a child who legally can't consent, who needs the treatment or they will die? Do you respect the parents' wishes for them to be accepted into the kingdom of Jehovah, even if the child will die? Or do you go through with a blood transfusion regardless? Which one is the right option? Religious freedom or the life of the child? This is all an interesting thought experiment, albeit one that actually happened, which I guess doesn't make it a thought experiment, on what someone thinks about the medical system when it involves someone who definitely can't consent and will definitely die. And people are often split down the middle. Some people value real-world material human life, some people value religious freedom. It's a question with a lot of debate and no fixed, objective, moral answer. But added layers of complications start to come in when the parameters aren't so definite. A lot of people, not all people, with depression or anxiety or eating disorders don't actually die from them. And it's also not so morally clear that adults who are suffering from things like depression or anxiety or an eating disorder objectively aren't in their right mind. For example, over this past year and a half, if you've been feeling stressed out about rent, unemployment, social isolation, eviction, homelessness, to the point where living every day as though it's your last is so exhausting, to the point where you'd rather not have to do all of it and just die. Because in your own mind, that's something that would be preferable for you to do. Should you be arrested and put into a mental health ward for being too crazy to make a decision on your own? Or are you just responding understandably to a hostile world with a deadly virus and mass unemployment and mass evictions going around? In the same regard, if you're being socialized throughout your entire life to believe that you need to reach a nebulous and undefined target of skinnier, because you've been marketed to as fat your whole life, and the world you live in is trying to A, hold you to unrealistic standards of beauty and tell you that no one will ever love you if you're fat, only to B, also tell you that you're too skinny and how it's dangerous once you decide to actually do something about it. Do you then deserve to be publicly humiliated and shamed off a platform for being something so audacious as alive in public? Or are you just responding understandably to a hostile world and holding on to the convictions that you grew up being taught, rightly or wrongly, because it's the only thing you know? My point here is not that people with EDs are right or anything like that. Moralizing eating habits in any way isn't something I have the power nor desire to do, and something that hopefully you don't either. Furthermore, if you have an eating disorder and you feel like you're going through a similar kind of thing, then I recommend talking about it to someone who cares about you and values your perspective. I also tentatively recommend some form of therapy, with the caveat that A, while it often helps people, a lot of forms of treatment can be incredibly intrusive and have high rates of relapse. B, a lot of places in the world have very limited or no help available whatsoever. And C, I'm not a licensed therapist or clinician, nor do I have experience in therapy for eating disorders. Do your own research, and I trust you to make the right decision for yourself, whatever that turns out to be. My point is, instead, that just because someone is existing in a way that makes a bunch of people uncomfortable, that could potentially be dangerous to themselves, then maybe that person shouldn't therefore be told thousands of times by thousands of people to forfeit all their legal rights to autonomy in favor of looking right and getting help. Let's imagine that, for the sake of argument, Eugenia has been universally determined to be unable to make a decision for herself, which means that we have the moral incentive to intervene and encourage her to get help by any means necessary, as if that's something we have any way of possibly doing. Put yourself in her shoes for a minute. Is a wave of thousands of messages from people she doesn't know, and probably never will, concerned about specifically her weight not conforming to their expectations of someone they think is happy, something that she's made very clear isn't something she wants to discuss on her online platform, mind you, all phrased in exactly the same way as most of the general hate comments she's gotten in her life. Do you think that's actually going to have any meaningful effect? On the one hand, you might think that seeing a wave of people saying they care about you and hope you get better might motivate you to seek help in some way. It might even sound at first like overwhelming support and encouragement. But as someone who has suffered from broadly mental health issues, I'm here to say that that's not how all this positive reinforcement works, and that assumes that it actually is positive, more on that later. If you've ever been a vaguely public influencer, you know the tedium of getting hundreds or thousands of comments through on a piece of content you've created. Most of the time, your relationship to the comments devolves into an amorphous collection of people put into the world to reaffirm the fragile ego that fuels your lifeblood, whereas most of their relationships with you is they've seen your entire video discography. They know and like the content that you make. They know your opinions on the song Mask by Dream. They know your favorite band. These people see you as though you're talking to them individually. So they leave a comment as if they're talking to you as a single person. There's this two-sided relationship dynamic here. They know all this information about you. They have this whole idea of you inside their brains. But you only know that they're a fan of you. This is a parasocial relationship, and it's basically how celebrity culture has worked since forever. There's an illusion of a social relationship here, but it's only felt by one person, and most of it isn't reciprocated, other than maybe a thanks or the occasional comment. Multiply that by a few million and things get real scary real quick. My point is, while you individually know that you're a real person with thoughts and feelings and stuff, Eugenia doesn't. Eugenia can't. The human brain physically can't comprehend the idea of that many real people. There's just not enough disk space in our brains for that much data. So instead, the brain generalizes. The people in your audience become your audience. The people who leave hate comments become the hate mob. That's not a fault of Eugenia, that's just how being a public figure with an audience of millions works. Something interesting about parasocial relationships, though, is that they aren't just limited to positive friendships. We might feel a parasocial relationship towards people whose content we enjoy, but they can just as easily be developed negatively towards people whose content we despise with all our passion. Just look at what happened to Milo Stewart in 2016 to 2021. A lot of comments under Eugenia's videos are pretty vile, threatening, and downright conspiratorial. And these relationships clearly feel incredibly personal to these people. Again, multiply that by a few million and things get real scary real quick. And as an audience and as people, I think we need to come to two separate realizations. Firstly, that we fundamentally can't fully separate ourselves from the groups and communities we're a part of. We know that we're an individual with thoughts and feelings and tailored interests that make up an entire personality. But to the people who receive thousands of comments and messages every day, we are just one person in a gigantic bubble made up of accounts who comment on my videos sometimes. Secondly, all this, whatever it is between Eugenia and us, just like any other relationship we have with an internet celebrity, it's entirely one-sided. Eugenia doesn't owe us any explanation of what's happening in her private life, no matter how much we demand it from her. For all we know, maybe Eugenia just doesn't want to make online content where she discusses her weight. This whole eating disorder thing is just speculation on a public figure who's only ever talked about this type of thing once online. Astute speculation which, according to my own personal observations, seems largely accurate, mind you, but speculation nonetheless. And through the actions that Eugenia takes, she's made it almost crystal clear that it's very unwanted speculation. She streams on Twitch. Any comment insinuating that she's too thin or has an eating disorder of any kind is deleted on the spot. Something that is entirely within her right to do as someone in control of her platform, and something that anyone who isn't a total shithead will respect. And one might come to the conclusion that maybe this implies that it's something she's decided she doesn't really want to talk about. And honestly, looking at how eating disorders are discussed online, in her comment section alone, that's probably a reasonable decision to make. In case you haven't noticed, there's this society-wide stigma around eating disorders, from the fact that anorexia and people with anorexia are often the butt of jokes about people's weight, to the fact that anyone who's any level of skinny is met with unwavering comments about anorexia to the point of bullying them off the internet or even to suicide, or that the only way that we as a society treat eating disorders is by assigning intrusive medical interventions when actually for a lot of people the problem has mostly social causes, or that people with eating disorders are dehumanized and reduced to their disorder by everyone from the public to the medical system to YouTubers deceptively editing their thumbnails to make someone look more demented than they actually are, and many, many more. Trust me, I could spitball examples off the top of my head like I'm Ice-T listing examples of addiction.
That's the house on the pony.
The point is, there's a lot of ways that discrimination against people with eating disorders manifests, but I want to focus on, in particular, the ways in which people talk directly to people with eating disorders, since that's the most antagonistic and the most relevant thing to this conversation. But before I dive into this, I want to mention the caveat that my experience with eating disorders isn't overly expansive. I dealt with this type of thing in the past for a little under a year, but I kept it mostly under wraps, and I didn't have much by way of comments directed my way about it. I'm only interpreting what people have told me through my own flawed brain. Feel free to correct me in the comments below and also share your experience. On a side note, trigger warning for the comments of this video. I'll pin another warning in the comments as well. But I want to dive into the ways in which we, as a society and as individuals, talk about eating disorders and talk to people with eating disorders through how people react to Eugenia just existing on the internet. Eugenia made a video explaining slightly vaguely how most of the comments about her size and appearance seem to not treat her as a person. The comments I show you will be from that video to emphasize the point that most of the people watching are not only super tone deaf but also don't even respect her enough to listen to what she, as the person who is going through the eating disorder, has to say about the things that affect her directly. The most boring type of comment that she gets is comments that are just generic body shaming. Comments similar to these tend to come up pretty much regardless of your body type, especially so if you're a woman or femme presenting, but they're just a lot more prevalent if you're deemed too thin or too fat by people. They're generally just hateful and shitty comments that tend to end up being left for no reason other than to be shitty to a woman online, which is one of the internet's favourite pastimes, new video on that later on in the year. But know that the internet has an animosity towards literally anything that helps teenage girls and young adult women feel comfortable as themselves. See The Beatles, Twilight, Dream SMP, BTS, One Direction, Justin Bieber, also the entire song Scott Pilgrim ruined a whole generation of women. The patriarchy never stopped existing, it just changed flavours. Thanks to this patriarchy, we, as a society and as people, tend to feel more entitled to speculate about women's bodies in a more demeaning way. Double especially women whose bodies don't fit the normal mould we would expect them to. As just one example, femme-presenting streamers face infinitely more comments about their body than male streamers do, to the point where they make entire streams from people who made inappropriate sexual advances in chat, got banned for it, and want to be unbanned again. And these types of comments consistently fail to respect the boundaries of these women in the slightest. But when these comments are being directed at women who visibly have EDs, a common excuse is that they do it out of concern for her well-being, and the desire for her to get better. And while that concern is probably mostly genuine, and more on this later, a large proportion of these people who leave these comments just go on with their days without passing a second thought on how to solve the issues that actually face people with EDs. More often than not, we aren't really concerned on some deeper moral level. We just think that people suffering from eating disorders shouldn't exist on the internet, in front of our own eyes. Because let's admit it, to some extent, we think that kind of gross. We see someone who doesn't fit our ideas of what a healthy, attractive person should look like, and as a result, it feels easier to discard their humanity and not have to think about them as a person until they get better. When I say this, I know it sounds like I'm being a bit rude or judgmental. Do bear with me, I promise you I'm not. We don't pass judgment on this type of thing here. Even I do all this to extent, that's why I'm saying we. Don't get me wrong, I try not to, but obviously I slip up sometimes. All I'm doing here with this video is looking at this behaviour, which a lot of people do, and reflecting on why exactly we do this. Mostly because it's free, it's interesting, and it helps you figure out how to not do these things. There's no way around it other than through it after all. And honestly, a lot of it we just picked up without even properly knowing why. We just saw everyone else doing it and we decided somewhere in our brains that we should do it too. Take the example before about how we know that murder is wrong. In super academic spaces, this picking up on behaviours and ideas is called learning. But the good news that comes with that is this means that if we don't want to do that, we can just unlearn it. It takes some time and some effort, but it's definitely attainable. Another wave of comments, the majority of things that people say to her, are the comments expressing concern about how she's killing herself and she needs to get help. And while these comments are often coming from a good place and said in the best of faith, the fact that eat a burger comments have started to disappear is telling of that, now that people have realised that that's actually a short-sighted way of looking at EDs. These other kinds of comments are also a bit short-sighted in very much the same way. First off, these comments aren't particularly helpful for reasons mentioned before. You telling her to get help isn't going to convince her to get help, no matter how much genuine thought you put into the message. She doesn't know you, you're just a nameless, faceless comment, that's all you can ever be. Secondly, the help that's available to people who go through EDs is very limited in a lot of places. There's a lot of rules, criteria, conditions that you need to meet just to qualify for help with EDs. In America, that includes financial burdens inaccessible to a whole bunch of people. And even if you do meet the criteria, there's still a major chance you won't get help, or that the help won't even work. So just getting help isn't a possibility for a lot of people. And the help that they often do get is incredibly intrusive and scary. Christy Michelle talks about her own personal experience as an inpatient in a residential treatment facility here, which made the experience not particularly great for her, for example. Thirdly, comments like this often tend to have the opposite effect, because if your only interaction with something is being told that you need help, that comes with the assertion that whatever you are is A, not good, and you need outside intervention in order to be normal, and B, the only important part of your existence. And being not normal means being part of that other group. And if that's the only part of your life that gets brought up, that can feel dehumanizing. Multiply that by a few million and it gets really scary really quick. So regardless of what your intentions are, and regardless of whether you're just looking out for someone, just saying, please get help, you're killing yourself, doesn't do what you want it to do. Other types of comments that Eugenia gets is the weird conspiratorial comments. Things about how she's doing this deliberately to manipulate her audience and she secretly thrives off the attention. Alternatively, things about how her mother is pulling all the strings behind the scenes, abusing her, never letting her see her friends or something. These conspiracy theories have been brought into video form, and apart from the unnecessary level of speculation into the life of someone who, again, clearly doesn't want her life to be speculated upon, it's kind of a weird and interesting conclusion to come to. And to be clear, when I say interesting, I don't mean in a positive way, more in the sense that it adds another layer onto the complications of talking about this issue. Willie Mack made a video about this whole thing, and while some parts of it are a bit sus,
even though he disavowed it, he was still declared alt-right.
Overall, most of what he's saying is pretty understandable. It's interesting that people try to assert some form of conspiracy, because to a lot of people, a structure of abuse is one of the only ways people feel like they're entitled to access to someone's personal life. If someone's being abused, we feel a moral imperative to intervene, and we feel justified in doing a lot more speculation than we would otherwise. And if it turns out that that's true, then usually the ends justify the means. But if it's not, then they really don't. So people who are dead set on the conspiracy stuff tend not to even be able to comprehend the possibility that they might be wrong about it. They've invested too much into this to even consider that they're on an intrusive wild goose chase, and if there's a possibility that they come to this conclusion, there's a lot of atonement that might have to come with that. It's the same type of mentality that keeps people in cults. This isn't to say that people who buy into conspiracy theories about Eugenia are in a cult or anything. It's way too decentralized and unorganized for any of that. But if that's you, it might be useful to put at least some weight into the possibility that her parents aren't actually abusive crazies who force her to stay skinny for once. I've dug myself a massive hole here. I'm already 28 minutes into a video saying that you're wrong for having a popular opinion about a controversial figure online. And if you're still here, I commend you. But like most situations, kerfuffles, or whatever you'd call this type of thing, the truth is a lot more nuanced than Eugenia is 100% a victim or Eugenia is 100% a villain. And honestly, it's a lot more boring. On the one hand, it's important to respect the privacy, autonomy, and personhood of Eugenia Cooney. The fact that this video, the one you're watching right now, exists, just adds more fuel to the fire, and I wouldn't be making this video in the first place if I didn't earnestly believe that these things needed to be said and heard and listened to. But on the other hand, you can't exactly ignore the signs. Eugenia has been getting quite a bit thinner recently. EDs have a pretty high relapse rate, so it only makes sense to assume something like that has happened. And it's only human to care, right? As content creators, it's important to acknowledge the effect that your content has on people in your community. Partly to make sure that you can recognize the positive effect that you have on the world. Content creators' egos need to be stroked as much as possible, like and subscribe, but it's also important to check up on whether you're affecting people negatively. And this isn't just me saying Eugenia's content is inherently harmful, because I don't want to jump to that conclusion, and for the most part I don't really think that's the case. I think that a lot of the work she puts into her content is super cool. Her videos have fun, cutesy vlog energy, and she honestly seems super nice and sweet. I can totally imagine numerous people seeing her content and enjoying it for the antics and stuff in her videos. But at the same time, as someone who's had some, albeit limited, experience with eating disorders, I have weird feelings about these content creators. On the one hand, I think that creators who have some form of ED have voices that are important to listen to, and I think that just because of their ED, they shouldn't be de facto barred from the internet just because of that fact. Also, Eugenia doesn't even talk about eating disorders on her channel. It took Shane Dawson, of all people, to get that information out of her publicly. But if someone sees Eugenia as their own thinspo, as the kids say, and then dies trying to get there, is that something that we should blame on the creator? Because while I don't suffer from an ED so much nowadays, I've been able to address it and stuff. I got help from a few people in my life and I don't really feel it anymore. But sometimes when I watch her content, I can still feel a kind of little voice trying to come out and play. Is that Eugenia's fault? I really don't know the answer to that question. A lot of people bite that bullet, and to some extent I can understand why they do that. If Eugenia didn't create her content, that person wouldn't be able to idolize the way that she looks. While the methods and the effects are vastly different in terms of scale, audiences can be introduced to things like EDs the same way they can be brought into the alt-right. Eating disorders are super competitive. I've seen eating disorder Twitter, and some portions of it can be genuinely terrifying. Adding more fuel to that isn't something that I can advocate for in a vacuum. But there are other things that can be done to fix this problem, or at least address it, that don't just so happen to infringe on the rights of people with EDs to exist in the world. An increase to funding for mental health systems, an improvement upon the methods of treatment, playing our part in erasing patriarchal gender norms, keeping the predatory diet culture in check, as well as a greater general understanding of what EDs are and how they work, would all have a huge part in stopping that person from potentially risking their lives, while also not punishing people for going through bad shit. Speaking of a greater general understanding of what EDs are, eating disorders are a bit like ADHD, in the sense that they're named solely around the things that neurotypicals care about. ADHD is a complex disorder with various symptoms, one of which is there being no correlation between your executive function, that is your memory, self-restraint, and motivation to do things, and the things that you end up actually doing. As a personal example, half the time I will see things that I'm motivated to do, writing the script to this video for example, and I'll come to the reasoned conclusion that I should, aka I have the moral and personal impetus to, sit down at my computer and start typing words and stuff about this topic. And then I think, cool story bro, and I don't do it. That type of thing is most of what the ADHD part of my brain is. It leads to me talking extensively about things that I'm super interested in, oversharing, saying super inappropriate things when I don't know not to, and then for things I'm not super into, I do nothing about them and instead freak out about how I'm not doing those things. And yet, ADHD's name only talks about inattention and hyperactivity, which are mostly minimal symptoms of ADHD, especially mine, which is comorbid with other, irrelevant to the video at hand, mental health problems. But if a kid is inattentive and hyperactive, they're the symptoms which might bother and challenge neurotypical standards and ways of living. So naturally that's how the disorder is defined and referred to. Basically these things usually get named before we understand what causes them properly. In a similar way, we have this tendency to see eating disorders as beginning and ending with people not eating and therefore being incredibly thin. But what they are and how we see them are wildly different. Apart from the fact that anorexia isn't the only ED, and many of them manifest wildly differently, eating disorders are often a wildly varying collection of a whole host of external factors, including, but not limited to, traumatic experiences, the societal pressures of the patriarchy with large sprinklings of racism and transphobia which may have caused traumatic experiences, internalized fat phobia, the tying of self-worth to health and weight as a result of the aforementioned patriarchy which lead to internalized fat phobia, competitive social circles that might be negatively impacted by content creators with eating disorders themselves, as well as internal problems like trauma, body dysmorphia, gender dysphoria, anxiety, depression, other mental disorders such as OCD, autism, schizophrenia, DID, PTSD, self-esteem issues, health problems, all of which are subject to the very same host of external factors. Any number of these things can build up and cause someone to resort to an eating disorder. I'd go on and wager that 998 times out of 1,000, the disordered eating isn't the underlying problem. It's just one symptom of someone who's sick in other ways. You see why it's reductive to begin and end your discussion at "get help, eat a burger, you're killing yourself"? It's like telling someone who has PTSD or anxiety to just be happy or relax. Your life depends on it. Of Herbs and Alters is a YouTuber who has experience with eating disorders and has a lot of videos about their past, about eating disorders, about the things that people don't usually talk about. She made a sort of similar video to this one, and I don't want to tread on too much covered ground. Instead, go check out her video here, it's really good. But I do want to emphasize the point she makes about why a lot of these comments, while they come from a presumably good place, are so especially toxic and so actively harmful, regardless of their intent.
Which is another reason why these weight comments are so toxic and problematic, is that you're seeing an ED person doing something they enjoy. Maybe say you see them horse riding, or you see them in an outfit, or you see them doing yoga or whatever. And if you take their healthy passion and you make it all about their eating disorder, you can really poison this one good thing that's keeping them afloat.
A lot of the time, other hobbies are incredibly important within the lives of people with EDs and other disorders. Things like being interested in fashion, video games, makeup, cosplay, streaming, making videos on YouTube can all be fun, wholesome things that help people with EDs cope with the world around them. Bring that person's weight or their ED into these passions, healthy and productive in and of themselves, and that can completely tarnish and ruin those hobbies for that person. In the same way that if you have something like depression and you're showing off your interests, hobbies, things that make you actually enjoy life just a little bit, and people respond to that with something to the tune of, "Yeah, but you're depressed, you need to get help for that before we treat you with humanity," that's probably not going to encourage you to keep doing it, and instead make you not want to do those things anymore. Doesn't feel great, but functionally it's a similar example. So instead, I want to highlight what I think is an example of a good, supportive comment. Or at least a step well above the comments we've covered before. It's really nice to see that you're still doing the things that you love, makeup, fashion, cosplay, etc., because life pretty much hits rock bottom once you start losing interest in the things you used to love. Please keep it up with your passion and enthusiasm for the hobbies and activities that bring you joy. I hope you take care of yourself and surround yourself with those that nourish your well-being and happiness, both physically and emotionally. On the topic of healing and change, it's so easy to praise the people who've already made it, or are showing visible changes in their lives, but get frustrated with those who are still in the process of healing, including periods of denial. I know that healing takes time, years even, to begin to take place, and that path to healing is a winding path of ups and downs and plateaus. I'm just glad you're still alive and haven't left us, and that gives me hope that you're still on your life's journey, which is filled with so much potential and change. Despite all the care and criticisms you receive in regards to your decline in health, I still want to tell you that you've come a long way simply by living and existing today. You are still worthy because you exist. And I agree with everything in this comment. Seeing people do fun, healthy, exciting things that they enjoy doing is genuinely great to see, especially if they're going through tough times. And I think that people should be encouraged to do that when they feel like it. I'm all about maximizing people's enjoyments with their lives after all. I genuinely wish the best for Eugenia, and I hope that whatever it is that she's going through, because again we're just speculating due to the fact that we don't know her personally, passes as smoothly as possible. I hope she's surrounded by the people that will encourage these things to pass as easily as possible. I'm super proud, at a safe parasocial distance of course, of the progress that she's made in order to still be around to this day. And Eugenia is fundamentally worthy of love and care and happiness, and deserves to live her life to the fullest with all the support in the world, because she's a person, and therefore is worthy of our respect. Obviously the phrasing of this comment is a little bit primitive, I guess. I think that some parts could have been worded a bit better, but I do think that there's a lot of things right with this sort of comment. Now, I'm not blind to the fact that by virtue of her being a public figure with a large platform, many things that can help her on the way towards happiness and a treatment system that works for her might be substantially easier to obtain for her than for others suffering from a similar thing. Eugenia is also white, which means she doesn't also experience the levels of racist abuse that would come with being non-white in America or online, as well as numerous other areas of privilege which I am in no way, shape or form qualified to talk about. But, at the same time, the thousands of comments that she gets on a daily basis don't seem like they help all that much, and I feel like that's something that can and should be changed. The highest form of knowledge, it's said, is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our own egos and live in another's world. If we can reach a point where instead of getting angry at someone who we perceive as being stubborn or in denial or deliberately obtuse and not listening to us, we're instead able to understand what that person is going through, empathize with how they're reacting, how they're feeling, and forming our understanding on something they're going through based on that, then we can figure out what to do about it that way on their terms. And I think that that should be how we, as a society, first and foremost, talk about mental health. We need to talk about it in ways where we focus less on the ways that people are not like us, but rather on the ways that they are. What makes us human is not something as vain as how we look, or our bodies, or our brain. It's not our desire for love, or companionship, or our feelings. It's not our social circles, our intelligence, or even our empathy. What makes us human is simply our humanity. And that's something that can never be reasoned out of you or given away. There's obviously more about EDs that I could have included in this video that I didn't, simply born of a desire to make this video feel more accessible and not drag on too much. That being said, there are undoubtedly some nuances that I missed that are actually super relevant to the conversation around eating disorders. Everything I said was run through people who know more about this than I do, and I have sources that somewhat back up what I believe, but like I said before, all my opinions in this video are me interpreting other people's experiences through my own flawed brain and trying my best to present them as accurately as possible. As a result, please feel free to correct me on anything I said in the comments below. But, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I think that two things, in an ideal world, should happen. Firstly, I think that Eugenia, as someone with a public platform, should talk a bit more about her own experience with regards to eating disorders, once she's ready and feels able to talk about those experiences, of course. She's uniquely situated, thanks to having a platform of millions of subscribers, and while I think that she shouldn't be forced or coerced into doing or disclosing anything that she doesn't want to, I absolutely feel like a video documenting her experiences, made by her and on her own terms, talking about what she feels is important to her experience, would undoubtedly do absolute wonders for public awareness. Long shot, but Eugenia, if you want to do something like this, hit me up. Secondly, we need to stop harassing Eugenia. Comments like these ones, talking about weight as opposed to anything else, do not help. People are just a product of their surroundings. And if you're surrounded only by comments that are obsessed with your weight, demeaning you, telling you that you're not good enough as you are when you're just trying to cope with the world you were forced into, then you're going to internalize all that. But the same thing is true the other way round. If you're surrounded by people who support and encourage you, engage with your interests, and allow you room to just exist on the internet and in real life without fear of being targeted or harassed or attacked, then you're going to internalize that instead, and maybe live what I'd consider to be an infinitely better existence. I don't think this needs to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. All of this, everything I've talked about, applies to your friends in real life as well. If you have a friend in real life who's going through hardship, the best thing you can do for them is include them in things. If they have an interest, take interest in it as well. Engage with them sincerely as people. Invite them to gatherings, meetups, events, all safe and socially distanced of course, and be accommodating and understanding if they can't make it. And by all means, if they tell you they need help or they feel crappy, don't shy away from recommending help if you think it will help and you think they can get it, but just bringing it up whenever you can isn't going to make them listen to you. People only get help if they're willing to help themselves. So if you see this, I recommend that you go over to Eugenia's channel, send her words of encouragement, just as much love and positive energy as you can. Tell her you enjoy her videos and that her clothes and her necklace look dope. Because that's all she needs from her audience, and that's all we as her audience can give her. I'll see you around.
And in the gaslight that
One more thing I want to clarify before this video officially ends, is that recovery from EDs takes a long time, sometimes up to 7 years. There's a lot of things that come with healing, and regaining weight is only one of them. A lot of the healing process is internal and invisible. Placing your expectations for someone else's recovery from an eating disorder on their appearance doesn't really work. So if you're expecting or hoping for Eugenia to start gaining weight intermittently, then you'll probably be sorely disappointed when that inevitably doesn't happen. Try to relax your expectations and just focus on being supportive. By the way, if you enjoy this type of content, then please be sure to like and subscribe. YouTube actually tells me how many people subscribe from specific videos, so if you haven't yet, then it'll let me know that this is the type of video that you like, and I can make more videos like it. Also, I'll be releasing a video for patrons only that's about other things I couldn't include in this video, so feel free to support me on Patreon if you want to see that and you can afford it. Any donation amount is totally appreciated. Either way, stay safe, stay spicy, and as always, have a good one.